Have you ever wondered about these dots and strings moving before your eyes? They're debris in your eye doctors say. They're your own structured light of consciousness, we say. Want to know who's right? Stay tuned. In this series, we take a closer look at how we see the shining structure floaters and ask some inconvenient questions for ophthalmology to show that these floaters can hardly be vitreous opacities. The question in this episode is, why do floaters sink? By moving my eyes, I can make my floaters move in all directions. But as soon as I keep my eyes still, they sink down. The closer and larger ones sink faster, while the smaller, more distant ones sink more slowly. But why do floaters sink? The most intuitive explanation is gravity. Gravity pulls the floaters downward toward the bottom of the eyeball, right? Wrong. As we know, our eyes project an upside-down image of the outside world on the retina. However, this does not apply to opacities within the eye. These cast their shadows in a straight line onto the retina. So, if floaters were particles or clumps of vitreous material that were pulled down by gravity, I would expect them to rise in my visual field. Since I do not see floaters rising but sinking, the conclusion would be that the corresponding particles or structures in the vitreous humor are not sinking but rising. Could it be that floaters actually rise within the vitreous body? Yes, there are physical forces that could, in principle, cause floaters to rise. Let's consider density. From a physical point of view, an object rises if its density is lower than that of the surrounding medium. Now, according to ophthalmology, floaters are vitreous structures, namely collagen fibrils that have clumped together. They should therefore be denser than the surrounding vitreous fluid and thus tend to sink rather than rise. One could argue, both in the case of gravity and in the case of density, that these effects are extremely small, and that the movement of floaters depends much more on the state of the surrounding vitreous body and on eye movements than on gravity or density. Still, if there is any preferred direction of movement, it should be downward rather than upward. Therefore, if I keep my eyes still, I should see my floaters rising rather than sinking. But I don't. Okay, what about thermal convection? Could that cause the particles in the vitreous body to rise? There is a temperature difference between the warmer retina and the cooler front of the eye near the lens. In principle, this could produce fluid movement. The vitreous fluid might rise near the retina and sink again toward the front of the eye. This would provide a physical explanation for rising floaters. However, studies on convection currents in the healthy vitreous humor under natural conditions suggest the opposite. Even if a thermal convection current exists in the posterior vitreous humor, that is, near the retina, it would not be strong enough to move particles upward at a speed that we could perceive. Furthermore, the gel-like structure of the vitreous humor tends to inhibit free fluid flow. The phrase gel-like structure leads us to yet another possibility. As discussed in episode 1 of Inconvenient Questions for Ophthalmology, floaters can appear in the same constellations for years or even decades. Ophthalmology explains this by proposing that floaters do not move freely within the vitreous humor, but remain more or less embedded in its gel-like structure. One could therefore argue that when the eyes come to rest after a rapid movement, floaters are not moved by gravity, density, or thermal convection, but by the inertia of the vitreous body itself. As the vitreous body gradually comes to rest, the floaters would simply be carried back toward their original positions. Could this explain why I see my floaters sinking? It could. But if that were true, then I should also be able to observe the opposite effect. For example, if I first look high up into the sky, then quickly look downward and hold my gaze steady, I would expect my floaters to shoot downward, slow down, and then be pulled back upward. I do see them slow down, but they do not rise again. Instead, after slowing down, they continue drifting downward. So the supposed restoring motion appears to work only in the downward direction, but not upward one. From my own visual experience then, floaters seem to have a preferred direction of movement, and that direction is downward. As I've argued, neither gravity nor density, nor thermal convection, nor the viscosity and inertia of the vitreous body provide a satisfactory explanation. So what could explain this behavior? That's it for now. The question for the next episode will be, where does the morphological regularity of floaters come from? Do you observe your floaters sinking as well? Let me know what you think.